Welcome to Conversations About Men with your host, Gonzalo Salinas, the podcast about sexuality, masculinity, and every topic that can help men to become better men. This is a great space to grow your mindset, expand your knowledge, and get in touch with your deepest masculine truth. Hello, my name is Gonzalo Salinas, and I'm the host of your podcast, Conversations About Men. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations About Men with your host, Gonzalo Salinas. Today we have at the show Stefanos Sifandos. Stefanos is a mindset and transformational coach, but to label him just like that, I think it's a little unfair. The best way I can define Stefanos is as a Renaissance man, not only for the large and comprehensive range of topics that he teaches, but also for the way he integrates the cultivation of the body, the emotions, the mind, and of course, all that integrated with self-discipline. On this conversation, we talked about relationships, masculinity, men's work, sacred zones, relationships, vulnerability, and many other topics. So without further ado, here's my conversation with transformational coach, Stefanos Sifandos. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations About Men. Today we have a very special guest. He's someone that not only I admire his work, but also I admire the kind of man that he has built and the broad spectrum that he has created to help men. I'm today with Stefanos Sifandos. Hello, Stefanos.
Hello, my friend. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Let me ask you something. How do you, let's say, forget about the label. Let's say you have solid 5 minutes in a social gathering. You meet with someone, this person tells you, what do you do? How do you explain that to a person that you just meet?
It's actually quite challenging, to be very honest, and something that I'm refining more and more every day. If someone were to ask me that, I often begin with asking them a question. And the question I would ask them is, what do you feel you need most in your life? And they would go ahead and tell me, and whatever that is. And then I would move into really helping them understand that I don't play too much in the superficial or the surface. I like to explore the depth of our potential as human beings. And sometimes that entails going to some very uncomfortable, dark places. And in the realm of psychology, we call that the shadow self. And so I explore the shadows. I explore what hinders us from living a full life. I assist people in really living in their truth without hindrance from past events, pains, fears, or traumas. I teach and reside in the realm of trauma and how to deal with trauma. Now, I'm not a trauma therapist per se. I have a background in psychology and behavioral science. However, I'm a trauma-informed coach or mentor. And so, in addition to that, the focus is relationships for me. How do we move from an undesirable relationship into a desirable relationship? Our relationship to ourselves, to our parents, to our lovers, to ideas, to our children, to the things that matter most to us. How do we optimize those relationships? Because we know that when we optimize our relationships, we optimize our health and well-being, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. And so for me, that is what I do in the world. I look at how can we get the best out of relationships and how can they serve us as individuals, our families, our communities, the world at large. Essentially, that's me.
Wow. I got to tell you that's pretty impressive from a personal perspective. But also, I know that you work, this is very unique because you work with people that are sincere. Can you tell us what do you mean by that?
Yeah, people that are very willing to get uncomfortable, to explore the
Mm,
darkness, to explore the shadow, to not bypass and polarize their existence, but to embrace and celebrate their joys and their wins, but to also know that for life to be whole, we have to also explore the parts of us that are really uncomfortable. And
mm,
so we don't avoid those parts. So it's the sincere are those that aren't in avoidance, and they're not in suppression, and they're not in isolation of everything that's happening to them in their lives.
mm. And I noticed in your approach, you always bring the human body, the mind integration, and also the heart.
Mm.
Like, how have you created this holistic approach?
I think I just look back to our ancestors. I look back to wise people and civilizations of the past that really understood in order to feel whole, because that feels good to feel whole. It feels good. It doesn't feel good to feel broken or fragmented or fractured or separate. It feels
Mhm,
good to feel whole. And I think when I look back at our ancestors of thousands of years ago and some of the most advanced civilizations of our time, not that we're not advanced now, but previous civilizations and peoples around the world, different cultures, there was an integration of we have a mind, we have a body, we have a spirit, we have an anima, an animus, we have something that animates us, we have this immaterial aspect to life. And we also have a body that is connected to earth, a physical body, and we have this intellect, this mind. And
mm,
so there's various aspects to the being, to the human being. I think balancing the way we connect to those parts of ourselves is very important.
mm. And also, I noticed that you use all kind of tools to help people in general.
Mm.
Like you on this path of transformation, you use NLP, hypnosis, holistic health, physical conditioning. So, how long have you taken to like create this toolbox, and how do you know when you use a specific tool?
Mm. So it's the answer to the first part is over many years, and it's continual for me. It doesn't stop. I'm continuously educating myself,
Mm-hmm,
up leveling myself, familiarizing myself with new modalities, deepening the current exposure I have to the modalities that I'm already adept in, for
mm-hmm,
making myself more adept and more connected to those practices.
mm-hmm,
And the second part to your question, how do I know which modality to use or combine? That can be a tough one to answer, because it really depends on the individual. If I
mm-hmm,
see someone that is very disconnected from their body, I would start to use practices and tools around getting them back in their body. So whether that's mindfulness practice or awareness building, an exercise of that could be paying attention to what feels really good in their body, or listening to sounds near and afar or afar to near, and just mindfulness training. This is very simple. It depends on where they're at. It depends on how much
mm-hmm,
trauma or pain they've experienced, how disconnected they are from their body. Sometimes physical exercise and movement can be very important. Sometimes breath, particular specific styles of breath work can be useful, not always immediately though. That can
mm-hmm.
sometimes trigger a deeper trauma response. It depends on the individual, what trauma or tension they've suffered or they're attached to. So many variables.
Let's go into one of the fortes of your work. I know is conscious relating. You
Yes.
teach people about relationships in general, but this is not only focused on romantic
Mm.
relationships, right? Can
Mm.
you tell us a little bit about this part of your work?
Yes, of course. So essentially, it's really about how can we optimize our relationships? How can we relate to each other and to ourselves, and to um, what's really important, in a way that's healthy and not unhealthy, not coming from old patterns,
Mm-hmm.
not coming from old patterns that don't serve us anymore, that are just unconscious, habitual. We just keep running the same patterns, the same cycle, the same habits from our unconscious self that we used once when we were children, or when we were young. We use these compensatory strategies or coping strategies that are now maladaptive. They're not healthy. And so how do we shift those coping strategies to deal with friction, conflict, and tension, and deal with them in healthier ways?
And staying on that topic of conscious relating, I know that if one of the trainings or the courses that you are offering right now is one with your wife. You are offering this course that is actually designed for ladies.
Yes.
Want to manifest the partner of their dreams, right?
That's part of it. That it's more about connecting to their truth and releasing the pain of the past, and ultimately having a deeper connection to themselves, carrying deeper levels of self-worth, so they can attract a partner that can meet them as an equal where they're at.
Since the main audience of this podcast is a male audience,
sure,
is it possible to extrapolate what you teach on that course with your wife? For men, let's say a man that is single and wants to be in a relationship and wants to manifest that partner, is it possible to do that?
Of course, yeah. It's about creating first what you want in your life, and behaving in a way that's going to create a relationship dynamic that is where that woman that you desire, or the type of woman that you desire, the type of relationship that you desire, you're creating that container for it already with yourself. So you're looking at your stuff, you're looking at your own pains and your own wounds, you're looking at the key relationships in your life and asking yourself, are they healthy? Could they be improved upon? If so, how? And so you're creating the circumstances in your life. Now you're being proactive. You're being a leader of your own domain. You're a sovereign leader. You're not waiting for a woman or anyone else to come into your life and quote unquote fix you or fix the situation. You're empowering yourself to make the necessary changes to prepare you for a relationship that's conducive to your values, your needs, and your health. So you're doing the work now. Part of that could be making yourself fit and healthy as a man, making yourself strong and confident as a man, knowing your worth and your value, getting very clear on that, going through different exercises to get very clear on that, making sure that you're prioritizing your wellness. Making sure you're creating space in your week and your month, and you're not working 120 hours a week, because how are you going to have time for a woman or for a relationship if you're working 120 hours a week? So come in and say, well, what am I overdoing things? Am I extreme here? And come from that place, but do the work before you even bring a woman into your life for you, not for anyone else, for you. That's the priority.
Wow. And I noticed that on this training of conscious relating, you focus on, or at least you bring to the plate, trust, consistency, and vulnerability, which is are not precisely the most common characteristics out there. Why you bring that into the conversation?
So for your male audience, the female brain is consistently seeking safety, as is the male brain. We do it in slightly different ways. And so one of the ways we can be safe for others as men is be consistent in our behavior. That's very important. And so consistency, it demonstrates that there is a rhythm and a continuity to the way we're showing up. So people don't have to second guess us. They can relax with us. They can, which is very powerful. So they move out of the amygdala, out of the fear centers of the brain, and into a more relaxed, open, curious state. So consistency is very important when it comes to conscious relating.
And what about vulnerability? And I'm actually being specific on this because some men out there being vulnerable can mean for them that they are not safe.
So I agree with that. That can be very, very true. Very true. Where when you're vulnerable in the quote unquote wrong way, not under the correct circumstances or the appropriate circumstances, we can put ourselves in danger. So vulnerability isn't about having leaky emotion. But for men particularly, I call this the necessity to be vertically vulnerable, or vertical vulnerability. That means you've dealt with your emotions or your pains or your fears before you're able to express them to your partner or to your wife or to your girlfriend or whatever it may be. Now, what that looks like is having an issue, having a tension, or being in a sense of, adversity within yourself, or anger or frustration or sadness or confusion, bringing that to your brothers, bringing that to a tribe of men where they can give you feedback and reflect to you what's actually happening in your world and help you move through that and support you. And even before you go there, you engage in self-reliance practice where you work it out yourself, or you at least sit with it long enough to begin to understand it or connect to it or feel it. So, when we're talking about vulnerability, Brené Brown describes vulnerability, and she defines vulnerability as characteristic, as a situation or a state that holds uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And so when we look at that, I've done a lot of work with Special Forces soldiers. And so every Special Forces soldier that I've worked with is exposed to uncertainty, is exposed to risk, and has an element of emotional exposure. Now, that's, for me, that defines vulnerability, and that's us taking stead and ownership of where we're at. And so vulnerability is the birthplace, again, Brené Brown says this, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. And so with that said, we have an opportunity to grow when we're vulnerable. When we're sharing with others, we're being truthful. They're seeing a side of us that we know, that they may know. We're taking a risk. We have to trust them. They get to trust us. They soften. And then we start building intimacy and connection. Now, not everyone can handle vulnerability, and not everyone is trustworthy. So you have to be selective with who you're vulnerable with, unless you're completely detached from the reaction that they may have or the response they may have. If that's the case, then it doesn't matter. You can be vulnerable. And that's safe to be vulnerable in that sense. Physical danger, sometimes you can't be vulnerable. You have to actually, as a man particularly, when you're dealing with a dangerous situation, you don't have time to feel your feelings and be sad, and you just have to survive. So you got to mobilize and do what the fuck you need to do to survive and remove yourself from a dangerous situation. Later you can feel your feelings. Later you can deal with the trauma. But vulnerability isn't a green card, or it's not a go and collect $200 free card to break out jail free card to be vulnerable whenever you want. It's about being selectively vulnerable. That's important, especially for men.
And what I'm hearing also is that without vulnerability, it's impossible to build intimacy and connection. In other words, we lose the juice of relationships, right?
It's a very good point. It's not impossible. It just makes it very difficult, and there isn't as much depth. There isn't as much connection. There's more holding back. There's more fear there than there is openness and transparency. So the relationship becomes more built on fear. And so you develop trust over time through consistency, through speaking your truth, through not being volatile, through not being abusive, through sharing openly, through asking and being sincerely interested in your partner. We develop trust and intimacy and connection over time. Vulnerability is part of that. It's not the whole story.
Let's get into a topic that I'm very interested, which is masculinity. I heard you were talking about tribe of men. I'm gonna ask you about what kind of masculine work you are doing, but what really got my attention is on your training, Reclaiming Your Kingdom, right? I really love you basically touch every single relevant area for a man. So how do you start working with men, and how do you decide, creating this training?
Well, for me, it was a personal journey, my friend. It was really looking at my own masculinity and my own presence as a man in the world and asking myself, what am I doing? Who am I being? Is this really the type of man that I want to be? Is this really the type of person, human being I want to be? And what does it constitute to be a good man? And what I found was there's two questions to ask. Yes, what does it constitute to be a good man? And that's a subjective proposition that I need to look at within myself. But the question asked before that is, what does it mean to be good at being a man? And so I set about for many years, and it's a continuous journey, by the way, it doesn't stop. I'm growing more and more in this place, is going deeper into, okay, so what does it mean to be good at being a man? And I'm really unpacking that. And that's a question that I spend a lot of time in. And I've developed two core foundations around that. One is called the 5 pillars of masculinity, and the other is the 5 tactical virtues. And that really helps us understand, as a foundation, what does it mean to be good at being a man.
And I've heard in one of the interviews that you've given that you mentioned that the society is kind of like selling an idea of what a man's supposed to be. And how do you put on one side what the society tell us, or is kind of like programming on what a man's supposed to be, and the opposite, a man of integrity and a man that is honest?
If I understand your question, I think as a society we're quite confused as what a man is meant to be. I think men are confused. I think women are confused, and we're moving more towards that way because that's the pendulum swinging, right? So, and there are various reasons for this. There are massive changes geopolitically, socioeconomically, culturally, from a perspective of gender. The waves of feminism that have come through over the last 100 years. And this isn't a blaming thing. This is just the pendulum swing where perhaps women have felt very, very oppressed for a long time, and through various movements now that's changed. And what's happened is there's a confusion about the role of man, and we need to. This is a very complex subject matter, and so we need to understand that the pendulum is swinging. And so usually in our society we'll swing in extremes, and we're still swinging on the extreme end of what does it mean to be a man, and we're going to come back into some homeostasis soon. I'm not sure when, but soon. And so there are confusing messages out there for men and what it means to be a man. And so examples of this are, women will come to me and say, I want my man to be more in his feminine. And even men will come to me and say, I want to tap into my feminine side. Well, how can I do that? And the first thing I say is, you don't want to do that, actually. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is be balanced in your expression of femininity and masculinity, sure, but you want to really tap into your core essence. So as a man, do you feel that masculinity is your core essence? The answer is generally yes. And if it's yes, then I say to them, build your healthy expression of masculinity up. Because the more you do that, the more you step into your truth, the more you, so biologically, culturally, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, the more you do that and start honoring how your male brain sees the world, what you're built for, what you've evolved into over many, many years, millions of years essentially. Excuse me. When you start doing that, you will naturally be more appealing to a woman. When we're talking about attraction dynamics, you'll naturally be more attractive to a woman. And you'll be healthier in your posture and your expression relative to the times of today's culture. But if you focus on being something that you're quote unquote not, then you're only going to run into pain. And you're going to be very uncomfortable and very confused and disorientated. And you're going to repel women. Because most women that are heterosexual don't want a quote unquote feminine man. They want a masculine man. So if you consume yourself with expressive states of femininity and that becomes your norm, then from a place of polarity, you're not balanced. There's no complementary opposites there. And so there will be a repelling. And then men are saying, why can't I'm giving a woman what she wants, but she's not attracted, and I'm not attracted to her either because you're coming from your feminine. And so there's this massive, massive confusion. I'm trying to simplify or reduce something that's actually really complex. really is.
Yeah, but I really like something that you mentioned is we are coming somehow to a place of homeostasis, right? And this new place of homeostasis, as you said, would it be a new paradigm where men and women will understand what's the role of their polarities in their lives?
Ask the question again, please, one more time.
So this new place of homeostasis
Yes.
that you mentioned would be somehow a place, kind of like a new paradigm, new social paradigm, where men and women will understand more their masculine polarity and their feminine polarity?
Yeah, old and new. So there's a coming back to what we've lost and disconnected from, and it's doing it in a way that's in a new era. And so the cultural, the socio-cultural, socio-economic collective aspect of this is that we're almost honoring older aspects of what we are and what we've lost connection to in a new paradigm. And so there's going to require some navigating there. And it's less about men and women, males and females, and still that's very important. Men and women, males and females, and even non-binary considerations, which is another complex, very, very complex topic. And let's not even go there. In fact, not that I refuse to go there, but let's just not go there because it really is, it's going to confuse everything a lot more.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would assume the majority of your audience is normative heterosexual men. So let's just stay there. So it is a definitely recognizing the male and the female and the man and the woman, and it's also building each other as a humanity, not only two different genders, but also as a collective humanity. And that's going to be pretty new for us as well.
Let's go back specifically to like men in our society, Stefanos. And this might sound like a very simplified question, but it's not. So why men nowadays put so much pressures on themselves?
Again, number of reasons. We live in a society where we've lost our connection to ourself. Our self-worth is diminished, and so we're attempting to. We're diluted in a sea of people, for starters, and in a highly competitive environment that's hyper competitive. And our self-worth and our sense of self and our value, the value that we place on ourselves, has been diminished. And because it's been diminished, we're attempting to validate ourselves externally. And so there's this busyness in society and this busyness of man, and it's an attempt to increase our status, improve our wealth, or increase our wealth, increase our power, try and stand out as best we can. And we often prioritize all of that at the expense of our own well-being and our health and our integrity. And so there's somewhat the beginning stages of a response to your question.
And I remember that researching for this interview, you talk about kind of like men are placed in chasing the carrot model somehow out there. And I mean, being very honest on this conversation, that model sometimes can be appealing, like, chase the money, chase the hot girl, chase the Ferrari. And why ultimately this model doesn't work?
And there's nothing, I want to be very clear. Pursuit and pursuing is part of the male psyche and part of our construct as men. If we don't pursue, it implies that we're not confident, that we have no interest, that we're lazy, that we're not disciplined, that we're not self-reliant, that we don't respect ourselves enough to create and pursue in the world. So we're definitely not going to be attractive. Pursuit's important. It's fucking necessary. However, what we do in our society is we excessively pursue. And the reason why that's not sustainable is because it's at the cost of our health, of our mental health, physical health and wellness, of our relationships. We know that we live long and we live healthily and in vibrancy when we have social cohesion, when we have cohesion in our relationships, when our relationships are thriving, there's intimacy and connection and depth. And that doesn't occur when we are in excessive or incessant pursuit of something that may not give us the return that we actually need to then thrive mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And so it's an excess is the problem. It's an extreme that's the problem, not the actual act itself. Pursuit, there's nothing wrong with pursuits. We just don't know when to stop because we're so, again, we're more greedy than we have been as a society. Not that to say that greed didn't exist in Mesopotamia or in Egypt, in ancient Egypt or in ancient Greece or in some of the, in ancient Rome. In fact, that was part of the demise of many of these civilizations. It was greed. So I'm not saying greed's a new thing, but let's just learn from our past. Greed is part of the issue. And also it's a prioritization of values. If we shift our prioritization, then we start to shift the way we relate to ourselves and to others.
I wanna ask you, this is an important question because you mentioned before when you open yourself to your tribe of men, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Stefanos, what is the importance of having a tribe for a man, to have a tribe of men that you can trust and you can open yourself to do men's work?
What's the importance of having a tribe of men?
Exactly.
It's everything. It's everything, brother. It's everything. So when it comes to our work as men, when it comes to navigating with the world, we evolved in bands of brotherhood. We extended the perimeter. We created shelter. We created safety. We hunted. We did that together. We did that in bands of brothers, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 men. We relied on each other for our sense of self, our sense of self-worth, our identity. We knew what our purpose was through the mastery that we gave to the group. We knew our role and our place. Men in today's society are so isolated. It's one of the biggest pain points that men experience is isolation, not having anyone they can connect with deeply, share with, speak to, communicate to, unload on, receive, give advice and guidance. Remember, we often practice and teach what we need to learn the most. If you're not practicing giving guidance, if you're not a mentor, then how can you be mentored? If you're not being mentored, how can you be a mentor? Giving and receiving in equanimity. We lack that. And so this thing of isolation is destroying men from the inside out. And so we need that more than ever. We need to honor our truth and our past and our wisdom and our ancestors and our evolution. And we need to start really opening up our hearts and our minds to the possibility of being connected again at a deeper level.
Wow. I love it. I have to tell you this. Well, on this topic, I did notice that you have been working with Sacred Sons, right?
Yeah.
Doing men's work in safe, sacred container. I've worked extensively with the Mankind Project.
Yes.
And I've heard from, many men that I admire, including you. And I've seen the work that they have been doing. Can you, just to inform the audience, what Sacred Sons are doing to advance the work of men?
Yeah, absolutely. We're really just helping men liberate themselves from pain, liberate themselves from being isolated and disconnected. We're just helping men heal, helping men have a space to just be seen, and to not be judged. Sacred Sons is an opportunity for us to help men heal and awaken their true power and their potential. And we do that through events. We do that through workshops and retreats. And, we do that through different online courses and the use of different modalities as well.
Beautiful. Knowing the work of the Mankind Project and, having so many people recommending this to me, I will definitely check it out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put the link also on the notes. The path of the masculine, right? From being a fragmented, broken man that are, unfortunately, almost the majority in our society, to be an integral man, what it takes, Stefanos?
It requires attention to self. It requires a willingness to go where you haven't gone before, into the unknown, into the darkness, into the discomfort, into the sometimes paralyzing fear. That's, in short, without putting too many words around it, that's what it requires as a massive starting point.
And for a man to understand, kind of, or kind of like get back the power that somehow he lost along the way, it takes to take a look at the shadow. It takes to go into the darkest spaces. Like, how do you help a man that is not trained and, it might be scared of his own shadow? How do you help him navigate on that place?
It's a great question. So it requires first trust. We have to develop a rapport, a connection, a sharing, an intimacy, a bond that can take time. Sometimes it happens within a few seconds and a few minutes. Sometimes it takes a few hours or a few different sessions. Just depends. Depends on the level of the individual, how much trauma they've experienced, maybe how abandoned they feel, how much humiliation or rejection they've experienced as men in their lives, how much shame they carry. So we develop trust first, and then we slowly expose, pendulation titration, and we slowly expose over periods of time, change, transformation, a new way of being, a new possibility. Sometimes if the person is very cerebral, we stay there. We stay in the cognitive realm of self, and we expose a new version of man from here. Then we maybe drop into the heart or into the body. But it takes time. And it doesn't necessarily always take a long time. It doesn't always take weeks or months. Sometimes it takes hours and days, minutes. It just depends. But establishing that trust through rapport building and bonding and sharing and understanding and bringing forth some form of revelation, which can be really helpful, that's a starting point.
Does it change the amount of time that it takes on that process of transformation if you work one-on-one with a man or if you work in a group setting or a workshop?
So that's another really good question, and the reason why I say it's a great question is because most people would think, the obvious answer is one-on-one. That's going to be a deeper dive. Yes, and maybe not. So there is something, remember what I said a moment ago about men witnessing men and men being in the presence of other men. There's something very powerful that happens in a group dynamic when we're going through maybe a Gestalt therapy or very specific shadow work or fragmented work of self. And we're doing that in the presence of other men, and there's a group of us supporting each other. That can be very powerful and deeply empowering and liberating, as can be deep one-on-one work as well. And so it really depends on the individual and their stage of evolution. I would say both actually carry equal value in different ways. And so the astuteness and the intelligence of the practitioner is to realize when that individual needs what and how.
Wow. Stefanos, on my personal work as a coach that help men, one of the part of my work is to help men that are hooked on porn. So men that are addicted to porn, I help them to liberate themselves from this addiction. And this is almost a pattern. This is almost a constant that I find over and over, which is what Michael Gorian calls on his book, The Prince and the King, or The Invisible Presence, the other book, healing the father-son wound, or the projection of the invisible presence of the mother over the relationship that they want to create with a woman. So let's start with the first one, the father-son wound. A man comes to you and you immediately, identify that there is something to heal right there. How do you start working with that man?
If they have an issue of abandonment with their father, they have a father wound. Again, it's definitely about building trust and then really focusing on reliability. And so seeing that man, building him up to express and expose himself in quite vulnerable ways, and then to meet him with non-judgment and to continuously be present to what he's saying, and for me to be unwavering. So he gets a very real example of him sharing whatever level of vulnerability or intensity he's sharing at, that's very confronting for him, and to then witness another man that's not judging him back, that's not humiliating him, that's not running away or leaving, that's not abandoning him, that's not judging him or rejecting him, but that's really present. And that's how I would begin that process. And then help that man find other examples of other men in his life, near and afar, that can actually hold him and can see him for who he is, without the judgment, without the humiliation, without the critique, the extreme critique.
What about the other side of the spectrum, like the invisible presence of the mom, that is that constant image that if it remains unconscious, will be projected on the new potential relationship with a woman? How do you help men to navigate and heal that space?
Yeah, the invisible stuff's, the invisible or the unconscious is always more challenging, of course. And so really in that sense, I have the man really understand and express and connect to the fullness of the relationship that he has with his mother, and help him understand and connect to what the wounding is there. Help him understand, what pain is he carrying and what pain is he projecting, and can he observe the patterns of that in previous relationships that aren't really his patterns, but he's taken them on, or that isn't really his stuff, but he's taken it on. Maybe there's an enmeshment or an entanglement with mother, where the mother emotionally projected upon her son that he is now the emotional husband, and she relied on him for all his needs because the husband wasn't there. Maybe they were divorced, or maybe the father just worked a lot, or maybe the mother and father didn't have a healthy relationship, and so the son took all of that on. And so we start to work through all of that and really help the man assume responsibility and ownership for the part that he's played. It's not blaming, it's not shaming, it's ownership and responsibility, so then he can then make some changes in his life and in his relationships, not keep repeating the same choices whenever he's pushed to his edge or whenever he experiences tension and pain and suffering.
Stefanos, we are coming to the last part of the interview. One question that I want to ask you for sure is, as men, especially a man that dwells on his masculine energy, we are doers, and we are very driven by mission, right? But what do you do when, like, any average man comes to you and he doesn't know what to do with his life? Like, he's confused and he likes this topic, but he's not sure. Like, what do you do when a man literally doesn't know what his life mission?
Yeah, I firstly want to dig into the uncertainty. So where is the uncertainty coming from? And does the uncertainty play a role in various other areas of his life, such as his relationships, such as his health, such as decisions that he makes about just his life in general, where to move, what job to take, what food to eat? I want to understand the uncertainty more. That's really the first step. And is it a theme in his life? And then we just want to really look at giving him permission to identify his values, because it could be, it's all good that he's confused or he's uncertain, but where and why, where is that coming from and why does it exist? And so I can run him through a values exercise. I can put him onto resources such as Dr. John DeMartini, which will help him identify his values. I'll help the man do that. However, that's all irrelevant if we're not addressing the theme of why is he holding himself back? What are the fears that are holding him back from making decisions and getting clear on what he likes and what he doesn't like?
I really loved what you said, kind of like giving him permission, because on that place of authorization is kind of like receiving the blessing of the Father, to like develop and show himself on this world. And ultimately, that's, help him to heal the masculine energy on himself, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Last two questions, Stefanos. For any man that is listening to this interview, what would be the one resource that you would recommend him to start a path of greatness, on his masculine life? Maybe it can be a workshop, a book, a course, training, any type of activity.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a difficult one because so many different men, they learn differently. Some people learn through workshops. Some people learn through reading a book. I'm going to say this. As a man, there are various principles and various things that a man needs to bring into his life in order to really tap into the core essence of him.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is solitude. So I would practice being in solitude, being on your own, not because you're scared or you're coming from fear or you're coming from a place of victimhood or you're being passive or you're scared to talk to other people because you're scared of being rejected or humiliated. It's not coming from fear. It's the path of the warrior to be in solitude, not always, but at various times during our lives. So I would say practice solitude regularly to get to know yourself at deeper levels, to acquaint yourself with all the parts of who you are. And one of the best ways to do that is through solitude, stillness, and silence. So solitude.
Meditation can be one.
That can be one, yeah. Disappearing going into the woods for 3 or 4 days.
Awesome.
That's another one.
And of course, where can people find you, Stefanos?
Yeah, thank you. So stefanossifandos.com or Stefanos Sifandos are my social media handles.
Absolutely. I really have to recognize that your training, Reclaiming Your Kingdom, is, probably one of the best that I've found out in the market as, complete trainings for men. And, totally recommend that to the men of this audience. Stefanos, thank you so much for your time. It's been a blessing to have you here on the show. And, I will be putting all the links on the page. And thank you again for your presence.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Conversations About Men. We hope you enjoyed and learned from this. Don't forget to subscribe and share the love. And if you have any questions or feedback, I will be happy to connect. And until the next time, let your light shine.